Welcome to WSP's Anticipate Podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Bruce, Senior Consultant for Corporate Sustainability Advisory at WSP Middle East. The environment, social and governance movement known as ESG has been gaining traction for quite some time now. ESG really gets to the core of why you're in business, the impact you have on the world and what you communicate and disclose. The impact of COVID-19 has really highlighted how interconnected systems are and how damaging an external shock can have on the economy. As a result, we've started to see more and more companies apply a sustainability lens, transform their business practices, and better manage ESG risks. In this episode, we'll be exploring the role of ESG in the Middle East and from within the banking and investment community. It's a privilege to be joined today by two prominent experts in the ESG field, Michele Wong, Managing Director at MLW Consultancy, and Belinda Scott, Vice President and Head of Corporate Sustainability at First Abu Dhabi Bank. Ladies, welcome to you both, and thanks again for joining this discussion. To get started, I'd like to ask you both, what are the biggest ESG risks on the horizon? Michele, let's begin with you.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for having me. And thank you, WSP, for hosting this podcast and this very important topic. I think there are multiple ESG risks out there right now that's trending, but the one that's very prominent to me that I'm seeing in multiple industries, across industries, is supply chain risks. A lot of companies are now looking into how they procure products and services and their production line in their supply chain, looking at the ethics and environmental risks. This is one of the things that I've seen trending globally. I'm not sure if maybe Belinda agrees or...
Thank you, Michele. Thank you for inviting me, Katherine. I'm very pleased to be here. ESG risks, really, from the position that I'm coming from, I'm looking at things like extreme weather. I think that we're seeing generally extreme weather is becoming increasingly a risk globally. And even we've had extreme weather in the region. And we had Cyclone Gonu several years ago, and we have hotter summers and significant rainfall that actually causes flooding and damage in the region. Climate is definitely a key risk, not only, again, as a global risk, but here within the region. So much so that the Ministry of Climate Change have a national committee to work on the risks and how climate will impact the whole of society. It's not just environmental, and also how it will impact the stability of financial systems across the world. I think that there's risks arising through digital inequality globally, and I think that could potentially cause a lot of problems in the future. Countries, again, that have the ability to take advantage of implementing digitalization within government and within the private sector, and the countries that don't have access to that. So I think that there's issues there. And I think that COVID has thrown up the risk of managing, diseases. We still have global issues around malaria and other issues, and then all of the fallout of all of them and how they impact the social and environment, the social and the environmental and the economic well-being of the world, the systems, and how far-reaching those risks can be. So they're my top concerns, I think, in terms of risks.
Thanks, ladies. That was really interesting. It's very prominent as well that climate change will have that impact on the supply chain, and also your discussion around digitalization as a risk and potential opportunity. I think the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of human capital and the social aspects of ESG, like employee well-being. Be interested to see if GRI or SASB standards also uplift themselves to consider these aspects, since they're traditionally reporting against more health and safety as part of human capital. So going into the Middle East in particular, do you think there are any specific ESG risks that are really relevant for the region? We're going to open that up to either of you.
Yeah, so I think that we use a lot of expatriate workers, simply because the local populations are quite small, and also to bring in expertise and knowledge that we don't yet have because we're still quite young economies. And I would say that with the issues around health and well-being, it's really sort of made us think, how do we continue to bring in talent that's needed to drive the roles that contribute to the economy? And when there's a pandemic, and does that affect the ability to attract and retain talent? And I think also one of the other things that we see coming through, definitely in the work that I'm doing and the discussions that I've had with my colleagues in the talent attraction and retention space, is that increasingly employees are looking for responsible organizations to work for. So I think that will change things going forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Belinda. Employee well-being has ranked quite high in a lot of material topics across different organizations. I think in previous years, people saw ESG and corporate social responsibility as a motto for sustainable business practices. But as we start to approach the government's different targets for net zero by 2050, Michele, do you think that CSR is enough? And what are you doing to help organizations go about embedding more CSR and ESG practices into their organization?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think a lot of companies, especially in this region, they focus a lot on the E and the S, the environment and the social. And there's less of a focus on governance that I found when I'm speaking to a lot of companies in the Middle East and even actually globally as well. And a lot of people forget when we're talking about corporate responsibility or sustainability practices that there's a large part of that includes integrity practices, ethics, anti-corruption, compliance. And I think the governments in the GCC have largely focused on these topics, and they've started embedding a lot of new policy and a lot of new laws. The challenge here is education, and also trickling it down to the private sector and on an individual level for people to understand the needs for this and how it affects risk, ESG risk, and how it puts companies at risk for the large part. In terms of assisting companies today and how they can integrate corporate responsibility practices into their business, a lot of the times I like to showcase international standards and frameworks, some really great frameworks that have been that you've mentioned already, including GRI and SASB, the Certified Benefit Corporation certification. There's the Task Force for Climate related to financial disclosure and the Carbon Disclosure Project. I know this isn't banking and investment related, but sustainable fashion is a very, very large topic in the sustainability industry right now. And they have a new Higg index to help with supply chain risks. I think one of the things also in the Middle East is a lot of people still believe that CSR is just a charitable activity. I know a lot of the major companies and international companies know otherwise, but a lot of the smaller companies are, especially SMEs and family businesses, still don't fully grasp the extent of what it means to be to incorporate sustainability and corporate responsibility into their business. I think as an industry as a whole, including this consultancy hub and industry, as well as those in the sustainability field, there needs to be more of a way to tackle and kind of expose ourselves to those who don't really have access to this knowledge, and they're not having these conversations with their own circles and their own business circles.
I definitely agree there, Michele. You brought up some good points. And also the fact that frameworks like GRI and SASB help organizations to disclose information and share it to a wider audience in a way that's comparable. You mentioned there about the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. FAB is actually one of the first financial institutions in the Middle East that's been committed to implementing the recommendations of TCFD. Back in 2017, they also issued the first green bond in the Middle East. And now they're the only financial institution in the UAE to report against the Equator Principles. And in 2020, they were awarded the best bank in the Middle East for corporate sustainability. So that's some really great achievements there, Belinda. It's great to hear that FAB's driving the sustainability agenda in the region. Could you tell us a little bit more about the other initiatives that you're involved in? And how are you further embedding ESG into your operations?
So we've been on a journey for some time, and I think that we got to the point where we realised that actually we need to work out the direction that we're going. So we've separated actually CSR and corporate sustainability, and they have two quite distinctive areas of focus. I can't talk so much for the CSR team, although their focus is on development of youth. But in my area, we look at sustainable finance, and we're working closely with corporate and investment banking team to look at more opportunity around sustainable finance linked to the SDGs, renewable energy, and we're trying to understand where the opportunities are around social financing. Our team in the UK are quite involved in financing social housing, and we also finance social housing in the UAE. But it goes beyond initiatives, and it's more fundamental than that. We're working on a sustainability strategy and roadmap. It's a long-term commitment to develop this, to make sure that all of the areas of the bank understand what their contribution and what their role is. Also, we have the ESG risk team that sit within risk that will develop the ESG risk framework that will be implemented across the bank. It's a journey, and I know that everybody says, oh, it's a journey. It's a journey because you never get to a point where you say, oh, I've done it, and you step back. It's being aware of all those, like you said at the beginning, that the global ESG risks and how they are relevant in the region, and then what we need to do. And I think that the key thing is that government is leading in this area. They've set the direction of travel on what those expectations are. And also they've set the expectation of what they expect from the private sector, especially in terms of how they can contribute to the UAE's SDGs. So therefore it gives you that sort of momentum. And now with the UAE Sustainable Financial Framework that's recently come out, again, it sort of sets those expectations. So I think that there is significant movement, not only within the UAE, but we see it in Bahrain and also in Saudi as well, that this is the direction of travel. And therefore, there's lots of opportunities, but we also need to make sure that we're at the same time really embedding risk frameworks within our organisations.
Thank you so much, Belinda. You've definitely touched upon some really interesting topics there, particularly around regulatory developments and the mounting pressures that are coming from investors and governments to influence companies to consider ESG factors in their organisation. It's good to see that FAB has a well thought out sustainability framework and policies. Perhaps maybe more consultants need to play a bigger role in encouraging investors to look more into ESG issues as part of their wider duty to clients. One of the big challenges in this is, what do we really define as ESG? How do we stop sustainable development goal washing, SDG washing, just being thrown in as a buzzword, or greenwashing and marketing exercises from taking hold? Michele, have you seen in organisations you've worked with greenwashing, and how do you manage to add more clarity to what ESG really means than just a box ticking exercise?
I think the first thing to kind of just identify is a lot of people who are in the marketing field, their intentions are good. And it's really important to kind of take that approach in kind of identifying what their intention is and goals and objective for how they're marketing. And then kind of just identify and kind of showcase how harmful certain marketing practices can be from an environment and social perspective. I think the large part is the lack of education or awareness of ESG practices. And I think the more that people understand how integrated and how much can be focused on in terms of looking at purpose-related projects and how it can impact the beneficiaries that they're trying to assist, it can help with greenwashing and or avoid greenwashing and SDG washing. I think a large part is a lot of major companies are not ready to take certain goals or tackle certain goals, but they want to be part of the conversation. And I think that's also a really good indication that people want to be part of social impact and they want to incorporate it in their business in some way. However, I think just avoiding that, talking about it and not actually doing it in the back end needs to be largely addressed across all business industries.
Thanks, Michele. So going back to more socially responsible investing and the investment horizon in general, social responsible investing, it started really back in the 1970s, where investors used screening methods to exclude investment in things like guns, tobaccos, gambling, and other vices, as investing in these companies was seen as supporting quote unquote morally bad or socially unresponsible businesses. So SRI investing is starting to pay off, but ESG investing is really that step further, where environmental, social, and governance factors play a fundamental role in the investing process. We recognize that companies do integrate ESG standards are more likely to outperform their peers in the long run. So, what do you think it will take, Belinda, for ESG investing to become more mainstream?
First of all, it has to be driven to a certain degree by demand. Investors have a huge impact and influence on where things are being changed. If you've got investors or you've got clients that want to finance things that have a social impact, they're increasingly going to have to look at, okay, we're going to finance this through an SDG tool or how they're going to do that. But also the banks themselves, the financial institutions have a role to play to educate their customers. For a bank, it is, ESG is about business. It's about how we are going to be sustainable long term, that we're not going to end up with a loan book or a portfolio of stranded assets. I think that one of the things that will drive some of this is actually transition, because I think transition now is one of the key areas. So transition finance, transition risk, and how we all need to understand the issues around that and how we can help companies, because they may go out of business in the future if they don't understand what the risks are. And there's a lot of, we can see there's the whole thing about oil, and there's the whole thing about coal and all of this, but also the impacts, because of the impacts that they have. It's about understanding what the business case is, what the actual inherent risks are if you continue to invest or to finance things with very high social risk. And what can you do to move it towards something that is less risky? So we need, as an organisation, to develop the products, the tools, the knowledge, so that we can work with our customers to guide them. And also it is education. But it's also for the regulators as well. So it's a multi-pronged attack, I think, or not, if attack isn't the right word, but the world isn't the same as it used to be. And you can't ignore all of the things that are there now. And I think that we are all beginning to understand that everything is interconnected. And therefore, we need to get an understanding of how financing does play a big role. And I think that together, government and the financial sector can actually create huge change, taking a more, I would say, not responsible, but a better approach to managing some of the key things that are coming up that are going to impact us all in one way or another, and to find solutions through finance and engaging with people and providing access to our services and to knowledge.
No problem. I definitely agree that finance plays a huge role in improving ESG issues across the world. As a bank, Belinda, what's your opinion on divestment versus engaging? So, for example, taking a big incumbent carbon polluter, do you think as an organisation you should be divesting from such investments, or actually engaging with these organisations to help improve their ESG issues?
It's really interesting you've just actually raised that. I attended the Green Investment Principles Belt and Road session on transition finance last week. And, there was talk about how financial services have a big role to play in, helping companies that are big producers of, if it's oil or coal or whatever it is, to understand those risks and then to have those difficult conversations with them. But I guess the starting point for the big organizations is to look at what they're financing and what the percentage of their financing is going into different sectors. I think that investors are asking these questions now. I think that SASB has got something around, looking at these different things, how much of your loan book is going there, or into oil, how much is going into, I don't know, other big polluting industries. And understanding where those risks are, and then saying, okay, what is it that we're going to do to manage that? It's definitely something that we're looking at through the ESG framework.
Yeah, it's not really a black and white in terms of divestment versus engagement. It can be approached on a case-by-case basis. And I think both of them have different pros and cons. Michele, as a consultancy, what is your opinion about this? Do you, for example, avoid clients who are fundamentally unsustainable? Or have you supported them in the past and engaged with them to improve their sustainability practices?
I think the definition term of being unsustainable is subjective. And I think in many ways, just by living, we are leaving behind a carbon footprint. It just depends on the choices that we make as individuals and as organizations. For me, choosing to work with the client isn't how unsustainable they are. It's how willing they are to learn and to kind of gain access to a new opportunity for their business, to transition their business. And it depends on like how open-minded the executive management is, or the founder or the board. That would be more of how I would choose my clients. I mean, it would be a lot harder to work with a more sustainable company with a very closed-minded leadership team versus an open-minded leadership team and a very unsustainable company, because there's more opportunity there to kind of help the company progress. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yes. Do you see that sustainability drive is coming from a top-down approach, or do you see it more as a bottom-up approach, or does both work?
I think it's both, and it also depends on the industry, the company, the organization, how large the company is as well, how old it is, and what kind of old practices there are. Sometimes you have a new CEO or a new board member that completely shifts the strategic path of that company. It just takes one small kind of trigger for a company to kind of look at something different. And sometimes it's because their customers are asking for it and their stakeholders are asking for it, or it's required by regulation. An example of this is Expo. Anybody who would like to be a supplier or a vendor for Expo, they require a sustainability framework. So a lot of smaller companies all of a sudden realize that they need this framework and they don't know what it is. So they're struggling to kind of develop that. So they have another motivation for it. So I think motivations come from all shapes and sizes. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in this region to kind of grow the sustainability industry in the focus area and kind of grow social impact in a more holistic way.
Thanks, Michele. I just wanted to touch upon the impact that millennials are having in investing. I think it's fair to say that millennial investors are approaching their financial decisions in a different way to previous generations. So rather than a sort of standard stock and bond portfolio, many millennials, when they're choosing their investment strategies, tend to consider external factors such as ESG impacts and the ESG performance of specific companies. So I just wanted to close with this question. Do you think today's socially responsible generation will mark a paradigm shift? Belinda, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I think they will. I think that they aren't afraid to walk away from things that they don't support or agree with. The power that they hold is really significant, and I think they will hold the world generally, but they will also hold the companies that they invest in or do business with or are employed by to account. They will create a shift in the way that business is done.
I recently read an article where they said 88% of consumers want brands to help them make a difference. And I think this is largely driven by the millennial generation and younger, but also it's starting because of easier access to services and goods, easier access to information. It's allowing consumers to empower themselves with the knowledge at hand to make decisions on what kind of products and services that they use. When it comes to investments as well, we're starting to see more, just even on a personal level, there's more options for us to invest in something more sustainable or ESG focused. And even one of my own financial advisors came to me recently and said, "Oh, we need to rejig your portfolio and have more ESG investments in there because of Joe Biden's new policy and policies that are being incorporated in the EU." It's already mainstream. It's just there needs to be more people aware of the options that are out there, and I think it is starting to ripple across the industry.
Thanks, Michele. I agree with you. I think that that's absolutely right. If I look at the young people now, there's a sense of disillusionment. To be honest, it's perhaps not as evident in this region, but if you think about it, they've been through the financial crisis. They see that, there's climate issues and, the whole environmental degradation, inequality and disruption from industrial transformation. And they're not able to have the education that they need at the moment because of COVID. So they're having to study in different ways. And really, they're not getting the university experiences that they would have had if it had been 2 years ago. So, there's so much there that the youth even coming, to the generation after millennials. And I think that it goes back again to what I said is that, the challenges that they're facing isn't actually being looked at with the depth that it needs to be, because I think that it really could be at least a short-term threat. But just, we need to make sure that there's adequate pathways for opportunities for them, so that they don't lose faith in the economic and political institutions across the world, but also the employers of the future, the retailers, the establishment even is meeting their needs and aligning again with their principles. So I think that it is a very tough time for them, and that they could impact businesses quite significantly.
Thanks both. That's really interesting comments that you shared there. I think it's very important that organizations consider their ESG impacts also for retaining and attracting talent. And the younger generation is no longer looking for a salary or a job title. They're looking to enter an organization that's really at the forefront of improving sustainability in the region and having that as a core part of their strategy. So I think on that note, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Michele and Belinda, thank you so much for your time. The insights you provided really paint a fascinating picture of the future of ESG and sustainable investing in the Middle East. I think progressive transformation towards a cleaner, greener environmental initiatives may seem more conceivable now than in comparison to recent decades. It's clear that we need a firmer pledge from companies in our region to reduce emissions, disclose financial risks related to climate change, intensify the actions and investments needed for a sustainable and low-carbon future. So signing off, my name is Katherine Bruce, and I've really enjoyed speaking with Michele and Belinda today. On behalf of WSP, thank you so much for your time.